We can start.
Good afternoon. Today we'll discuss American prophets, Emerson, Whitman, and others. I'd like to begin by just first highlighting the nature of the United States in the antebellum period. I want to show a number of images to highlight the artisanal nature of the United States at this time, and then discuss the specific American prophets. And so let me just go into let's see. So the one, I'm just giving a summary of the United States in terms of its how it expands. Louisiana Purchase in 1824, as you can see, almost doubles the size of the United States, and that led to or contributed to the huge debates over slavery and slave territory and free territory. Here's the United States in 1842 with the unorganized territory in the east. What's now California is mostly still Mexico. Republic of Texas. Southerners were obsessed with acquiring more territory in North America, in part because the rest of the world was abolishing slavery. The United States was unique. It was the true conservative nation in that everywhere in Europe was abolishing slavery. The United States was trying to expand it because of Southerners, and the expansion in terms of Southerners stemmed from the huge amount of money that they could make. And by far, the wealthiest Americans from 1820 until the Civil War were Southerners, and without question. So it becomes about. Here's the United States in 1850, where you see the red states or the slave states, blue states, are unorganized territory. A lot of it's unorganized territory, and Southerners want after slavery. The weather conditions, the humidity in the south versus the comparative coldness in the north, that didn't affect the limitation in terms of slavery. And here's the United States in 1854, where there's still a lot of territories that there's a debate on, and arguments on whether it would become slave state or free state. Slave states, free states was the central debate in the United States at that time. There's also a profound difference between the free states in the north and the slave states in terms of culture. We mentioned this last week. In the north, they were the 98% of Northerners were artisans. They received the fruits of their own labor, to quote. And that was true for men and for women. The North was very effective at creating roads and transportation networks, so that if you're an independent artisan, you can sell your goods and your wares and travel. The South refused, the slave states actually refused federal money, because in the South, the center of power was the plantation owner. And the American dream, so to speak, in the South, if you were poor, is that you work for a planner, and a planner might give you an enslaved person, and from there you could become a successful, wealthy Southerner, and that was the American dream in the South. As the rest of the world, as Europe was abolishing slavery, Southerners sought to acquire more territory. They wanted, they wanted California. They almost went to war over California when California enters the Union as a free state. In the North, one of the ways in which Northerners embraced their identity as artisans was through photography. And at this time, Americans had a love affair with the daguerreotype. Louis Daguerre creates the daguerreotype, the first form of photography, which is an accurate, a very accurate, detailed form of photography. And the daguerreotype circulates profoundly, especially throughout the North. And virtually every man, woman in the North would have their daguerreotype taken, a photograph taken. And it was a way of identifying oneself as part of a family, part of a community. It was also used if a family member died. Americans, Northerners believed that that if you daguerreotype a deceased family member or friend, that the soul would remain with them, and so and Northerners believed that a daguerreotype contained part of the soul as well as a bit of the body of that person. I will hand out some daguerreotypes so you have a sense of what they are. It's a unique and fascinating form of photography. And let me show you, as I'm passing them out, the degree to which Northerners would sit for their photograph, and they would do so. They often did it in dressed up. It was called an occupational image. They dressed up in the profession in which they worked as a way to disseminate their likeness, their photograph, but showing that what profession that they were in. And there are a number of them, and it was very popular throughout the North. So I'll just start showing you a number of images. Oh, female telegrapher. So she's sitting there, she's looking she's presenting herself as this telegrapher. Here's a seamstress, looking at that photograph. Here's an African-American writer. He's writing, he's sitting at a table. Here's a lockmaker. Here's a cook. Here's a blacksmith. There's a miner. So gold was discovered in California, and so huge numbers of Northerners, especially, went to California to mine for gold. It became an occupation. Yes.
So since these photos are like them kind of almost like depicting their soul that's the
Pardon me?
Sorry. So since these photos are almost them depicting their souls, or a way to kind of keep that within.
Yeah, so the daguerreotypes I'm handing out, I mean, if you turn it in the light, it changes the tone, and so at that time, Americans, when the daguerreotypes I'm handing out, they're from the period. They believed that part of the body and the soul was within that daguerreotype.
I'm curious, like, do you think their jobs were also connected to their soul? Like, with the jobs, do you think?
With the jobs?
Like the miner,
yes.
Would they say that job is connected to his soul as well?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
gotcha.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
Was this a widespread technology in the North? Were like a majority of like Northern artisans able to like get like a daguerreotype of their
To get what?
to get like a photo or daguerreotype of themselves or their family? It was just like a
Yeah,
widespread.
so they would sit for the photographer, and the photographer would then, they would pay money to sit for the photographer, and they would often, it was mostly it was kept in the family, but a lot of Northerners would be gifted a photograph from friends. So it was widely circulated. The photography was widely circulated. So it could both remain in the family, but it could also be you gift it to a friend or you gift it to someone that you don't know well but you admire. Here's a merchant marine. Here's a butcher. And again, these are they're showing themselves. They're sitting for the photograph within their occupation, and they were very proud of their occupation. There's a carriage driver. There's a watch repairman. Here's a fireman. Here's a surveyor. And all of these are professions that they worked in, and they got paid. In today's terms, it would have been a middle class income, a middle class family. A messenger and a writer. A doctor. Here's the young Sam Clemens, who is a printer's apprentice. They saw me as the first photograph of Clemens, of Mark Twain. And to contrast this artisanal culture in the North, I want to just show you a few images from the South. This is a oil on wood. It's not a photograph. Photographs did not circulate much at all in the South. But it highlights the hierarchy of the plantation with the house, the large house at the top of the hill. The wealthiest plantations were near rivers so that they could disseminate their cotton and other goods that were grown through enslaved people. Here is Benjamin Latrobe, an overseer doing his duties. So overseers in the South at that time, they were lower class, working class, who were paid on a weekly basis by the plantation owner. And it was in the South, the American dream is that you worked for a planter, and by hook or crook, if you acquired an enslaved person, then you were on your way to becoming a much wealthier individual on a plantation. And in fact, Frederick Douglass highlights the degree to which when he was, the other thing that happens in the South is on January 1st, if you were a large planter and you didn't have use for some of the enslaved people in your house, you would hire them out, and you would make money in doing so. And so it was a way of acquiring even more money. And if you were a comparatively poor white, the first thing you tried to do is to achieve the American dream is to acquire a slave, and ideally, and white Southerners were open about this. They would try to acquire a female slave, and then essentially, quote unquote, breed them, meaning that to require a female slave to be shacked up at night with a male slave. In fact, when Frederick Douglass was hired out to work for Edward Covey, because his actual owners didn't need him, Douglass describes in his second autobiography, My Bondage, My Freedom, the degree to which he describes how there was the slave owner, Edward Covey, who was worked for Edward Covey. Covey at that point owned one female slave, and he rented out a male slave, and he forced the male slave and the female slave to sleep in the same little shack. She got pregnant. By the end of the year, Covey now owned 2 enslaved people. And by 1860, Covey was in what today's terms would be a multimillionaire. And Douglass has a wonderful summary highlighting the dramatic contrast. This is later in life, highlighting the dramatic contrast between the North and the South. And he highlights the plantation. The plantation was a little nation by itself, having its own language, its own rules, its regulations, and customs. The troubles and controversies arising here were not settled by the civil power of the state. The overseer was the important dignitary. He was generally accuser, judge, advocate, and executioner. The criminal was always dumb, and no slave was allowed to testify other than against his brother slave. And Douglass was accurate here in the sense that the power, everything resided in the plantation. Plantation owners had more power than politicians in the state or the community. In the South, the artisanal work was done by slaves, and so one example is David Drake, known as Dave the Potter. The enslaved people create some of these now very valuable works, especially of ceramics. That was the artisanal nature of the slaves in the South. So there's this radical divide. Let me segue from that to the American prophets. Yes.
On that, really quickly, were there any meaningful number of white artisans who would provide their services for sale to wealthier white people in the South, or was it all? Was the vast majority of the meaningful artisanal work done by slaves?
It was mostly done by slaves.
Okay.
So there was a northern. There were a few. The one exception of the artisanal nature in the North were the mills, particularly the mills outside of Boston. So they grew the mills, the mill workers, and they were wage laborers. And they northern merchants collaborated with Southerners. Southerners would sell their cotton, especially, to the North, who would turn it in the mills in the North into clothing. And so there was Charles Sumner, the abolitionist senator, Harvard student. When he was senator, he said there's an unholy alliance between the lords of the loom and the lords of the lash. And so that was the one example of a kind of industrial society, but it was tiny. It was in the outside of Boston. It was the only place really in the North that had that. So let me start to focus on the American prophets. Let me start with Emerson. Emerson was one of the nation's leading essayists and intellectuals. He led what was known as the Transcendental Movement, which was essentially, in a sense, if there was a religious aspect, Transcendentalism was this understanding that God or Jesus is within you and within all humans, and that from that perspective, it was through the Spirit that you would identify your profession, and you would be beholden to working hard and to being a good citizen. He was a Unitarian minister. He left the church. Emerson was, he often identified himself as a Quaker. In fact, he said at one point, "I am more of a Quaker than anything else. I believe in the still small voice, and that voice is Christ within us." On another occasion, Emerson said, "If I'm anything, I am a Quaker." And Quakerism was especially fairly widely spread in the North. And in a sense, Quakerism is the antithesis of Puritanism. For Puritans, all humans are they're filled with sin. The foundation of a Puritan is that you're sinful and you can't overcome that. For Quakers, it's the opposite. It's the antithesis. For Quakers, God or Jesus is within you and within all humans. And because of that, Quakers were pacifists. Because to do violence against a human being is to do violence against God, because God is within you. And Quakers, they're a tiny minority today, but in the 19th century, especially in the North, it was one of the most popular religions. Which is why, as I said, that Emerson, he was a Unitarian minister, but he saw himself as more of a Quaker. And that was common. The inner light of Christ or God is within you, the dramatic opposite of the Puritans. And this spiritual framework helps explain Emerson's writings. Self-reliance, which is reliance on the inner light, in a sense. Listen to your inner light, and good things will happen. You will become a good citizen. In fact, in self-reliance, Emerson also then says, to believe your own thought, to believe that what is true for you in your private heart is true for all men, that is genius. So you share that inner light with your friends, neighbors, community. Speak your latent conviction, and it shall be the universal sense. So it's a way of, in a sense, combining religion with politics. Envy is ignorance, imitation is suicide. And again, for Emerson, his famous quote of "Trust thyself, every heart vibrates to that iron string. Accept the place the divine providence has found for you, the society of your contemporaries, the connection of events." Again, that reflects the huge influence of Quakerism on Emerson. When he says, "Everywhere I am hindered of meeting God and my brother, because he has shut his own temple doors and recites fables merely of his brothers or his brother's God." Emerson became an abolitionist as well in the 1840s, when in the wake of the British West Indian Emancipation, BWI in 1833, and that was very important in the United States because Britain had far more power and wealth and influence in the world than the United States. And when Britain emancipates slaves in August 1st, 1834, British tried to pressure the United States and every other slave nations that were still existing to abolish slavery. The United States was the true conservative. They were one of the especially after British West Indian emancipation. In fact, in the immediate wake of British emancipation, the United States was the largest slave society on earth. The largest slave society on earth, because the rest of Europe was abolishing slavery. Southerners understandably hated Emerson, and because of the degree to which the rest of the world was abolishing slavery, it's one of the reasons why Southerners became so virulent and aggressive, because they were the true conservatives, and they wanted to reopen and expand slavery and recover slavery as a positive good in the way that it's long been for centuries. Not everyone liked Emerson. Southerners, of course, hated him. John Quincy Adams, who abhorred fashionable quests for whatever seemed new, singled out Emerson as a leading perpetrator of the wild and visionary fantasies, that's his term, that had recently cropped up in New England. John Quincy Adams said of Emerson, after failing in the everyday avocations of a Unitarian preacher and schoolmaster, he starts a new doctrine of transcendentalism, declares all of the old revelations superannuated and worn out, and announces the approach of new revelations and prophecies. In a sense, he's critiquing Emerson's, the influence of Quakerism on Emerson, the idea of the inner light of Christ or God within you and within all people, meaning all humans are sacred beings. Adams grouped Emerson with William Lloyd Garrison, and also with the French revolutionary Jean-Paul Marat, and said that they were ingredients in the bubbling cauldron of religion and politics. But Emerson in the North was hugely admired. He was known as a brilliant orator. He would memorize his speeches, and he would essentially, as a vocation, he was a public speaker. And so was Frederick Douglass, so was a large number of people. And public speaking at that time, oratory was one of the most popular institutions in the North. People made good money as public speakers. It was their profession. Essentially, it'd be like being a professional basketball player or football player today. And it truly was their profession. And most orators in the North, they first would write down their script. They would memorize it. They would deliver their oration, and then they would publish it, often revised somewhat. So again, it's a kind of artisanal occupation. Let me move to Whitman. Whitman was unlike Emerson, who identified himself a bit as a Quaker. Whitman actually was a Quaker on his mother's side. Both Whitman and Emerson, in fact, they became friends, celebrated sacred self-sovereignty, which is it is a Quaker sensibility that God is within. Kingdom of God is not someplace above or beyond. God resides within you and within all people. God is immanent or indwelling, allowing an individual to overcome the burden of original sin and to reposition the fundamental locus of value in spiritual passions and emotions rather than in worldly authority and social conventions. For Emerson, poetry was political as well as religious. There was, Emerson was a huge fan of a number of European poets. Percy Shelley was one. Emerson declared that poets are the unacknowledged legislatures of the world. Why? Because poetry poets achieve harmony, unity, and order, which was foundational for a democratic society. They achieve harmony, unity, and order through language. And language is created and produced by the imagination. When expressed through poetry, language enables us to apprehend a higher beauty and truth. Form, in a sense, shapes meaning and imagination. And this was very common among Northerners. Frederick Douglass announced that the imagination was the peculiar possession and glory of humans. It distinguished humans from every other animal. It was a sublime, prophetic, and all creative power. It could be used to articulate a new world free from slavery, and it could be used to transform society into a better place. And for almost all of these prophets, Northern prophets, it was only humans who possessed imagination. And one of the kind of wonderful summary of Douglass and Emerson and Thoreau and the other so-called prophets was a line that Douglass used in one of his speeches, which is, poets, prophets, and reformers are all picture makers, and this ability is the secret of their power. They see what ought to be in the reflection of what is and endeavor to remove the contradiction. So as an individual, it's this inspiration for becoming a better person, a more, both in terms of your profession, in terms of your relationship with family, friends, in the community, in the North. I think it's a wonderful, and for Douglass and for Emerson and for these prophets, they saw activism, they saw protest and activism as part of their identity. In the 20th century, for a variety of reasons, there becomes a radical divide between art and activism. If you're an activist, as an artist, you're bad. There's this radical division between great art and aesthetics. Aesthetics is the nature of beauty versus activism. And in the 19th century, that was conjoined. That was fully embraced. Let me move to Whitman. Whitman was a journalist. He was a poet, obviously. He published poetry in newspapers. He had been a journalist for the Brooklyn Daily Eagle. He first published poems. His first published poems were anti-slavery poems. He was anti-slavery. He called himself at times an abolitionist. And the difference between anti-slavery and abolition, if you don't know it, is that an abolitionist was essentially a revolutionary. That slavery is such a scourge and so inhumane that we need immediately to destroy it. Whereas anti-slavery advocates, I mean, Lincoln is the example, a great example of anti-slavery. He said in numerous speeches that he hated slavery. He hated slavery as much as Frederick Douglass, as much as any abolitionist. But he was he was not an abolitionist, that the only way to end slavery would be gradual. And in fact, in his debates with Stephen Douglas accused him of being an abolitionist, and Lincoln said, no way, I'm not an abolitionist. He said, you know, I imagine the ultimate extinction of slavery will be in not less than 100 years, which would have put it at 1958, which is actually about right in terms of what happened. So to continue with Whitman, he's, as I said, journalist. His poetry, Whitman's poetry was a message in the sense of equality. Democracy is equality and connectedness. He self-published Leaves of Grass, so I'll hand out. This is not an original issue of Leaves of Grass, but it's a very good reproduction of what Leaves of Grass actually look like. His poetry was a message of equality. Democracy is equality. Whitman embraces he embraced the democratic spirit of poetry. He says from the preface of 1855, Leaves of Grass, which at that time for intellectuals, for writers, there's a myth saying that Whitman was not celebrated until the 20th century. But in New York, in the Northeast, the writers and intellectuals, they appreciated and understood what Whitman was doing and trying to do with his poetry. It was a radically new form of poetry. The tradition was traditional couplets, and Whitman's poetry is completely free verse. And from the preface of Leaves of Grass, he characterizes the United States and says the United States themselves are the greatest poem, which is a shout out, so to speak, to the United States. That the United States as a democracy, that his love of poetry, that poetry itself is a democratic form because it treats all humans as equal. And that both great poetry and, in Whitman's view, at least in the North, both poetry and Northern society included harmony, unity, democracy, inclusiveness, and connectedness. So he saw this relationship between this new democratic nation, in which, as you know, all of Europe was still was not democratic. It was royalty. The bard is to be commensurate with the people, Whitman writes. Of all mankind, the great poet is the equable man. He's the equalizer of his age and land. The messages of the great poets to each man and woman are, come to us on equal terms. Only then can you understand this. As a poet, he was what we would now call an activist poet. He embraced equality for all. He was also shameless as a self-promoter. In fact, Whitman, Emerson, Whitman prints Emerson. So Whitman sends, when he first publishes Leaves of Grass, he sends a copy to Emerson. Emerson loves it. And then Whitman immediately prints Emerson's endorsement as the first page in the second edition and publishes it in the Brooklyn Daily Eagle without asking Emerson's approval. And in fact, Emerson's endorsement reads, "I find Leaves of Grass the most extraordinary piece of wit and wisdom that America has yet contributed. I greet you at the beginning of a great career, which yet must have had a long foreground somewhere for such a start. Let me see if I have, I did have, there's little slides of Whitman that you must have not included them. The very meaning of leaves of grass also connect to the world at large, in the sense that first of all, why the very nature of leaves of grass? What does that mean? What's the relationship between leaves and grass? Well, leaves was a common word in titles. It essentially was related to literature. Leaves was, they were seen as pages in a book. But they were also considered to be part of nature. And Whitman, very much of this comes from the Puritans. Whitman sees that God is within nature, not in a negative way, but in a positive way. And grass, Whitman was a journalist, and he was a printer. And grass was a printer's slang for casual compositions that a compositor might set and type during downtime at the shop. Hence, the leaves of grass. He was embraced all different types of people as equals. Canuck or Canadian, Tuckahoe, a farmer or African American, Cuff, an outlaw, shady but interesting character. So for Whitman, leaves of grass means a sacred form of equality. He says, we are all light-hued and dark-hued, everyday people, blades of grass, nothing more, nothing less. We are individual leaves, in other words, is what he's saying. We are individual leaves, but from a distance, a beautiful unity. E pluribus unum, out of many one. So if you look closely, you see each blade of grass, and each blade of grass is distinct. Just like each individual, each human being is distinct. But you get back and you see them as a group, and they're this united group. Hence, Whitman's embrace of democracy. It requires each individual is unique, but a community, the nation itself, ideally, will work and function together. We are individual leaves, but from the distance, a beautiful unity, e pluribus unum, out of many one. The title, Leaves of Grass, reflects the book's efforts to break down various hierarchies, binaries, and accepted rules. Whitman, throughout his life, sought to collapse the distinction between body and soul. That goes back to the Puritans. For Puritans, the body is corrupted with sin, and the soul is the only way you can overcome that. There's this radical divide. Whereas Whitman wants to explode that radical divide and embrace them as coming together. Body and soul, flesh and spirit, sacred and profane, black and white, male and female, polite language and slang, poetry and prose, literature and pedestrian talk, uniting them. One is not better than the other. I mean, in that sense, he is a true egalitarian. His poetry articulates a new age of equality, a new age of a nation that he sees has the potential to be egalitarian. Whitman's poetry articulates a kind of new dispensation and new age. His new age depends, and this is where the limitations are. For Whitman, the new age depends upon a poetic form of unity, harmony, connectedness, and empathy. But in theory, that new poetic form could manifest itself in a new, in the sense, poetic form within the context of politics. That Whitman did not separate politics from poetry, politics from prose. For Whitman, poetry itself creates the condition for a pluralist society. In other words, politicians should pay close attention to this, to Whitman, to poetry. And through that, the society or the nation will become more democratic. It's not surprising that Whitman published his Leaves of Grass on July 4th. On July 4th in 1855. And it actually happened to coincide with a week before a abolition meeting that got a huge amount of attention. Whitman's poems shared many features with abolitionists. One was a democracy of inclusion. For Whitman, sacred society is one in which the divinity dwells within all people. Again, you can hear, sense Whitman's Quaker influence. The divinity, God is within you, within me, within all humans. Meaning to do violence against humans is to do violence against God. There's also an aesthetic of connectedness between one person and another. This connectedness, the friendship, there's something that's physically beautiful about friendship. One of the myths of Whitman is that he was not read in his own time. One of the myths is that he had a cult status at the end of his life and became canonized only in the early 20th century. That's actually not true. He was popular. He was actually quite popular in the 1850s. He started out having a cult status at the beginning, but he was well known. And in fact, Emerson refers to Whitman by saying, "I am not blind to the worth of the wonderful gift of Leaves of Grass. I find it the most extraordinary piece of wit and wisdom that America has yet contributed." And Emerson was a kind of king of intellectuals. He was seen as one of the great intellectuals of his era. Lincoln, when he was still a lawyer with his law partner William Herndon, had a copy of Leaves of Grass in their law office. So when people would come and needed legal help, when they're waiting to meet with Lincoln, they would on the table could pick up Leaves of Grass and start reading. Thoreau was so taken with Whitman that in 1856 he made a pilgrimage to Whitman's home in Brooklyn, New York, and he said that Whitman was apparently the greatest Democrat the world has seen. That's a quote. There's another example of the Anglo-African magazine. It was the first black newspaper in the United States in 1859, published in New York City. It quotes Whitman's poem, "I Sing the Body Electric." They saw it as being egalitarian in that way. Another example of Whitman's influence is this woman, Susan Garnett Smith, who was one of the workers of the world. She probably read Whitman's third 1860 edition of Leaves of Grass, which expanded on the 1855 edition, included titles and deleted ellipses. It included Whitman's poems that you read for the week, and she was from Hartford, Connecticut. And she was so taken with Whitman that she wrote him a letter after reading Leaves of Grass. And let me just read to you this letter. It's one of the most interesting letters that I have ever read. She writes, "Know, Walt Whitman, that I am a woman. I am not beautiful, but I love you. I am 32 years old. I am one of the workers of the world. A friend carelessly lends me Leaves of Grass for a day. Stealing an hour from labor, I take it out for a walk. I do not know what I carry in my arms, pressed close to my side and bosom. I feel a strange new sympathy, a mysterious, delicious thrill. What means it? It is the loving contact of an affinite soul blending harmoniously with mine. I begin to know Walt Whitman. I have not yet seen him. I feel that I must be alone. I turn my steps to Zion's Mill, a cemetery. The sun shines, the air is clear and fine. The birds trill songs, love songs, songs of praise for the boon of existence, or chirp amorously to each other. They do not hesitate to tell their love. Why should I? I seat myself under a tree and muse a moment. A lovely panorama is before me. Hartford and the surrounding country. Hartford is a lot better, have a lot more to say for itself. I hear no human voice, see no human form, but somebody whispers, "Open your book." The book opens itself. What do I behold? Oh, blessed eyes, I see the image of the great beloved soul, which has already embraced and encompassed me. Blessed be thy father and thy mother and the hour of thy conception. Oh, rich is America in her noble, manly, fearless son. Know, Walt Whitman, that thou hast a child for me. A noble, beautiful, perfect man-child. I charge you, my love, not to give it to another woman. The world demands it. It is not for you and me is our child, but for the world. My womb is clean and pure. It is ready for thy child, my love. Angels guard the vestibule until thou comest to deposit our and the world's precious treasure. Then, oh, how tenderly, oh, how lovingly will I cherish and guard it, my child, my love. Thine the pleasure, my love, mine the sweet burden and pain. Mine to have the stinging rebuke, the shame. I am willing. My motives are pure and holy. Our boy, my love. Do you not already love him? He must be begotten on a mountaintop in the open air, not in lust, not in mere gratification of the sensual passion, but in holy, ennobling, pure, strong, deep, glorious, passionate, broad, universal love. I charge you to prepare my love. I love you. I love you. Come, come, write, Susan Garnett Smith. Question for you all. How do you think Whitman responded? How do you think Whitman responded? Yes.
He didn't.
Pardon?
He didn't.
Pardon?
He didn't.
Whitman wrote, question mark, insane asylum on the envelope. Why? Why would Lincoln? Because Whitman embraces all humans as equal. I mean, it's a central theme in his poetry. Well, one answer is that he was gay and not interested. Even though in Leaves of Grass he loves both women and men and loves all adult bodies. The second reason why he might have said that is that Whitman, and this is true of a lot of artists and writers, he separated poetry from life. He was unwilling to act on his radical vision in his poetry. The poetry itself functioned, but he did not go out and truly act upon it. In fact, he said in one of his poems, be radical, be not too damned radical. He worried and was a bit afraid of radicalism taking over a community or a nation. And yet, though in late life, he regretted treating Susan Smith's letter the way he did. His friend Horace Trebell, who was early 20th century, late 19th century, a socialist and friend of Eugene Debs and Emma Goldman, asked Whitman why he responded as he did. And Trebell said, it sounds like somebody who's taking you at your word. You should have been the last man in the world to write insane on that letter. You might as well write insane across Song of Myself. Which is actually accurate. And Whitman acknowledges much. So actually, if any of you are interested in pursuing this, there's some terrific, very good, recently new books on Whitman and his vision of democracy. And Susan Garnett Smith, in her extraordinary letter, was one of many of Whitman's disciples, in the sense that scholars who characterize Whitman as a bard, and the disciples include a number of different categories. One, this would be in the after Whitman dies, late 19th, early 20th century. A number of socialists celebrated Lincoln as a huge inspiration, including Horace Trebell and Eugene Debs. They saw Christ and Lincoln as similar. Body reformers and sexual reformers were very common late 19th, early 20th century, and celebrated and very much embraced Whitman. And a lot of people who were deeply religious recognized the religious aspects or sentiment in Leaves of Grass. They saw Leaves of Grass as a kind of Bible, particularly William O'Connor, John Burroughs, R.M. Buck, who coined the term cosmic consciousness. The larger point is that for Whitman, the spiritual is reflected or manifested in the material. And through that comes this radical, true sense of equality and connectedness. Whitman's, in fact, we had to read his Song for Occupations. Equality is a central theme. Whitman, as a poet in particular, championed equality probably more than any other American, of a kind of radical equality. Any questions so far? Let's go to Bartleby, the scrivener. So, how many of you read Bartleby before? Okay, let me just give a brief overview. And then I would love to have a discussion on it, how you responded to Bartleby. It was published in 1853 in Putnam's Monthly Magazine. The full title was Bartleby the Scrivener, A Story of Wall Street. The lawyer is Mr. Cutler, who cut when the story was republished in Melville's collections. Cutlets, or the lawyer, does a snug business among rich men's bonds and mortgages and title deeds. As you know, it's an I narrator, and the narrator informs readers at the opening that he knows John Jacob Astor, who at that time was one of the wealthiest men in the world. So it's a story about about wealth and about its dangers and possibilities. In fact, the lawyer, as I said, informs his readers at the opening that he knows John Jacob Astor. Astor was widely considered to be the wealthiest American at the time. So already there was a small sense of a hierarchy of wealth. And their employees were Turkey, Turkey was very productive in the morning, very nice, and then he drinks too much red wine, and Nippers is much more productive in the afternoon and nice, they both drink too much. And Ginger Nut is a little 12-year-old boy in the premise. And the office is divided into two parts by ground glass folding doors dividing the office. There's one for Cutlets, the lawyer, one for occupied by Scriveners. Bartleby sleeps in his office. His taglines, I prefer not to. Bartleby stares at Cicero as if it's a law. Bartleby, as you know, he quits working. Cutlets doesn't fire him. He treats Bartleby a bit like a child. And Cutlet, the employer, says, "No man that ever I heard of ever committed a diabolical murder for sweet charity's sake. Mere self-interest, then, if no better motive can be enlisted, should, especially with the high-tempered men, prompt all beings to charity and philanthropy." There's a kind of apology of the lawyer for the head of the office, he sees his workers as a kind of family member, and Bartleby has been analyzed in a number of ways. For a long time, scholars have suggested that Bartleby highlighted the exploitation of industrial society. But at that time, the only industrialization really was the Lowell Mills, just outside of Boston. New York City, there were very few. In fact, New York City lagged economically behind Boston at this time. It wasn't until after the Civil War where New York City kind of becomes the city that's the center of the nation. There have been numerous interpretations of Bartleby, I would love to know how you interpret Bartleby, and I can tell you how my reading. But it's a part of the novella, I think, is brilliant in the sense that it's open-ended. The prose is written in such a way that there can be multiple interpretations of Bartleby and of the Scrivener, and there that can be seen as accurate or an effective interpretation. But it's one question to you all is, to what degree do you see this office as being an artisanal office, and to what degree would you see it as being the beginnings of industrialization? Any response?
Got you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I would think it'd be the opposite of can't pronounce it.
Pardon me?
Sorry, I think it would be the opposite of, I can't pronounce the word right, oh my goodness, hold on. Artisanal, oh my goodness, yes, wait, how do you pronounce that, artisanal?
Oh, artisanal.
There we go,
Artisanal.
I think it's the opposite of that, there's the word. Because they talk about like the cubicles and the workspaces, and you're kind of like separated from who you are.
Yes.
And then they talk about him working for the dead letters.
Yes, the dead letters.
Yes. Sorry, that word is some words I just cannot pronounce, and that's one of them. So I think it's the opposite of that. Very
So
disconnected.
you see it as an early form of industrialization.
Yes. Yeah. And that's why I think like when he says like Bartley, humanity, is kind of saying that's why this is humanity losing itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
That's good. That's good. Any other thought? I mean, there definitely is a sense of industrialization based on what you just said. It's a law office. Ironically, with the rise of industrialization before the large factories in the post-Civil War period, it was especially in lawyers' offices where you had a kind of a small-scale industrialization. In this case, it's just a few employees, but they're another question is, how many of you see Bartleby as being exploited by the lawyer, the owner of the law office? And or to what degree do you think the head of the law office is simply ignorant? That would be another question. But I would say that Bartleby, the story, anticipates industrialization before it's happened. Yes.
It seems to me that the character Bartleby kind of confuses or blurs that distinction between artisanal work and industrial labor.
Yes.
Because you mentioned last week that in the North at this time there was a lot of respect for artisanal labor as opposed to wage labor,
Yes.
and people having a small business or taking pride in their craft.
Yes.
And Bartleby, on the one hand, he seems not that motivated by the hourly wage he's
That's
getting
correct.
paid. He's pretty unmotivated by money.
Yes.
He rejects the offer of additional money when he's asked to leave or assumed to leave.
Very good.
But then, on the other hand, he doesn't seem to take that much pride in the work itself either.
That's right.
Because the head of the office, he seems to believe that most copyists should take pride in the copy work they do and should be happy to say, like, attach their name to their work output.
That's right.
And part of the responsibility is not just performing the copy work, but also checking it.
Yes.
So while Bartleby seems very industrious in terms of producing these copy works, he prefers not to participate with Turkey and Nippers in actually checking, reading over his work.
That's a wonderful response. I agree with you. And it contrasts the just the slides I showed at the beginning. The art, all of these artisans proudly presented themselves in front of a camera. They were proud of their work. They were proud of their vocation. And what you say, you're absolutely right. Bartleby is not proud in the same way that the firemen, and I can go back to the slides. I mean, every single individual who has his or her daguerreotype taken, they are proud. They wear that. That's why they're occupational. They wear their occupational dresses and coats to the photographer. Bartleby is not there. He's not one of these occupationals. Yes.
I think also the fact that he just starts not doing his work or declining, and then there are no real consequences, I feel like gets to that kind of existentialist, like, why does this
Yeah.
matter? And it's the same idea of, I think, industrialization in that capacity of, like, one person, what kind of real difference or tangible impact are you having?
Yes.
And then also you kind of get into that same mode of questioning when they want to remove him from the building, but there's kind of no good reason as to why, or like they're
Right,
doing
that's
anything.
Right. That's very
Yeah.
good. That's very good. Yeah, there's a declension in Bartleby that doesn't exist in the occupational daguerreotypes, and in most workers at the time. Most workers at the time were proud of their vocation. That's in the North. Most workers were proud of them because they received the fruits of their own labor. And for most, as we've mentioned, for most Northerners, it's farmers. It's hard work, but you see the fruits of being a farmer. You see the fruits of a lot of other occupations, whether it's a fireman, as I showed you all these different occupationals. And they were proud of what they did because they recognized that it was important for the larger society. And I mean, both of what you've said, in a sense, is that this law office is constrained in a sense. It's almost like a little. Say it's a little prison is an exaggeration, but there's not a sense of connecting this office with the larger world outside. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point about like alienation that you made, and it reminds me kind of Bartleby also as the symbol of like the slave economy of the South and this like lack of autonomy with labor. Like we talked about the daguerreotypes, and even when you brought that up, my mind first went to like the ones like in Harvard's museums of like enslaved and like how that like when we talk about like occupation and like photo as like symbol and of like citizenship and like family belonging. There's this lack of autonomy that Bartleby kind of mirrors to that economy that I thought about.
That's very good. That's very good. That's great.
So John, sort of interesting to place this view of work in the context of the main views of work in the modern age and in the whole West, right? So you could say there are three views of work. There's the view of work as an honorable calling.
Yes.
In other words, everyone has a trade or a profession.
Yes.
One of the characteristics of American culture was the early universalization of this idea of professionalism.
Right.
And so work is not just instrumental.
Right.
Work is also a form of dignity of the self,
Yes.
elevation of the self.
And pride.
Yes.
And with that, it's pride not just in the self, but a sense of pride about the community in which you live.
Yes. Then there's a second idea of work, which is instrumental.
Yes.
So you
Yes.
work to get a salary,
Right.
to reproduce yourself and your family,
Right.
and work itself is profane. and has no higher meaning in the second idea of work.
Yes, but that's in the
So-
antebellum period, it's far in the north, it's far that.
That
the
was not
instrumental-
generalized,
Yeah.
that view of work was not generalized.
Yeah, it was a small small
So,
part.
the family is a haven in a heartless world,
Yes.
private life, and the world of work is, in effect, similar to slavery. Mass production.
Yeah, especially.
As a command and control structure
Yes,
produces this desacralization of work.
yes.
Then the third idea of work was the work of the intelligentsia, of the elite,
Yes.
and work is a transformative vocation. So by transforming the world, you transform yourself.
Yes, yes,
It's a higher idea of work.
yes.
So what has happened, so you could take this as a prophecy in which work will lose its sanctity, will become purely instrumental for the vast majority of people.
Yes.
And we will not find a way to render universal the higher idea of work
Right.
as a transformative vocation.
Yeah.
So that higher ambition will be denied to the vast majority of people. So in that space then, work loses its sanctity and its value, its higher value, and becomes a pure material necessity.
Yes.
That's what Karl Marx described, that's the world of surplus value
Right.
and of forced labor.
Right.
Now, in that space, which is the space of the profanation of work, what we seem to have here is the inversion of the idea of agency. That is, Emerson's idea of agency is what characterizes the free and creative human being
Yes.
is a concentration of divine creative energy in the self.
Right, and he
Right.
saw that as, Emerson, in particular, saw that as being open to essentially every other,
Yes.
human.
Yes, and in a society in which that is not the experience of work, that's an idealization of what work is for the vast majority of people. For the vast majority of people, it will become purely instrumental.
Yes, it becomes purely instrumental, although.
And then the ethic implicit in Bartleby on this interpretation is it's an ethic of passive resistance.
Yes, yes.
True freedom is the young lawyer staying in the law office when he's asked to do
Yeah.
routine discovery work or anything like that.
Yeah.
No. And this
I
no,
prefer not
and
to.
this no is this no is the affirmation of freedom.
Yes.
So
It's the protest.
So there's a triumphal march of the Emersonian idea and this celebration of agency, which is a kind of pre-Nietzscheanism.
Yes.
And the question raised by this is that freedom, or is that the negation of freedom? Is true freedom to resist that triumphal march and to get off the roller coaster?
I would say that,
So, given how fundamental this idea is to American culture,
right.
to raise a doubt about it, you could say, is the utmost form of subversion.
Although there were, again, we'll get to this, with the war, there's a radical change in the north, but there were a large number of artisans, whether farmers or all kinds of farmers or photographers or small independent occupations. And the very term occupation is significant because there's a sense of pride for a lot of people in that occupation.
Yes. For those who adhere to this earlier idea of work,
Right.
the idea
mean, in essential, I think, in fact, I don't know of any published essay that's done this, but it would be fascinating to write an essay on this, based on this topic, that compares Bartleby with Whitman. Whitman,
Yes, because the poem on the occupations is like a generalization of the idea.
yes,
And a radicalization of the idea
yes.
of the honorable calling.
The honorable, and the proud, honorable and proud calling, yes. And so Whitman stands at is on one side, and Bartleby, in a sense, is on another side. And what's the relationship? Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting, and I wanted to go back to that point of the transition to industrialization, in part because I think Bartleby represents that transition in a very particular way. And when you think about the employer,
Right.
the employer representing this move to treating him as an instrument, but yet still wanting him to feel that sense of involvement and pride.
Yes.
And that seems like the biggest farce in the industrial movement, which
Yes,
is that
that's right.
to try and take on that artisanal pride and somehow incorporate it in your own instrumentation. And he resists that, but doesn't resist it like a passive resistance until there's a force against him. Like he's just doing his thing. And I think the interesting part is I see how many times in this piece eccentricity is mentioned. And the narrator's like, I was willing to overlook his eccentricity, but he had the eccentricity from the start. It was really the pressure of the industrialization, the context, that makes it a force that he's fighting.
Yes.
But it's not like he's fighting that force until the force is there, right? Like, I don't know if it's passive resistance until there's something against him. I think that's just who he was, and the whole thing is changing around him. And somehow, I think we're all surprised that how Bartleby becomes more and more and more. I was like, no, I think Bartleby has always been,
Yes.
and the actual circumstances were changing. And you could see the ire of all of the people that are around him in the workplace. They're getting madder and madder because he's not doing the thing that everyone else has done.
Yes.
But he's actually been stagnant, I think. I think everything else has changed.
Yes, that's very good. That's very good. That's very good. And in Bartleby, each worker, there are different times of day when they're most productive. And Bartleby is similar. I mean, he was, when he is writing, creating copies, he can be very effective. But then there are other parts of the day where he's he's out to lunch.
Is that human? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
we were up with the sun.
But that's
back
true. I
in
mean,
the morning.
the narrator says at the beginning that that's true with the other employees. One works best in the morning, the other works best in the afternoon.
But why is this philosophy of agency always so sad? Why is it so melancholy? Because in these figures like Emerson and even Lincoln,
Yes.
it's a lamentation, it's Priam's lament over the body of Achilles. So it's not a celebration of victory. The Nietzschean tone rings hollow.
Right.
So it shows some fundamental ambiguity, some fundamental ambivalence in the culture
Yes.
to this idea of incessant agency.
Yes. Although that's not true Whitman is about as optimistic as any poet and figure that you could meet. He was even through, if you follow his.
But the Emersonian picture of the self is like the self is a god, is a little god. He may even have his own planet.
Yeah,
And so this little god is although there's the assertion of commonality, shared work, shared tasks, the reality of the little god is it's hard for the little gods to engage with each other, to connect, to speak to one another. The little gods are isolated.
Yeah, although as someone like Emerson as I mentioned, there's a kind of Quaker aspect to Emerson of the inner life, and he, in fact, he
So they
acknowledged.
reunited what would cut against this, and reunite them or reconnect them
Yes.
with the inner light.
Yes,
With the infusion of divine
yes.
inspiration.
And Emerson had
But that depends on a miracle, a spiritual miracle occurring which is the indwelling of God in the world.
Yes, but it would be a miracle, but it could also be based on, faith. That the
Yes.
faith itself brings this miracle. That if one decides that, yes, God or Christ is within me, and then I have a different relationship with society and the world. And so it's important for me to embrace this understanding and to not let doubts or
Yes.
negativity set in.
Because in Tocqueville, there's an interpretation of why the Americans are so melancholic,
Yes.
which seems to be completely mistaken. And because you remember what the thesis is. The thesis is that the Americans take equality as their absolute objective, as their goal, and they can never have enough of it.
That's right.
So it always recedes before them, and that's why they're sad.
Yes, yeah.
It's
And I think
absurd,
that's
it's
wrong.
not- that's-
Yeah.
I mean, one can only understand that as Tocqueville's way of getting back at France, right? Which is his own, which is his real concern of the book. But they have a certain idea of freedom, in fact, as primary.
Yes.
Freedom as agency, turning the tables on society, building yourself,
Yes.
building everything,
Yes.
not just your material condition in the world,
Yes.
but your position in the universe.
Yes.
And this Faustian struggle to rise, so in fact cuts you off from everyone.
Yes, that's right.
And-
Whereas,
and-
yes, that's exactly
And,
right.
and that's the source of the melancholy.
That's right. Whereas someone like Lincoln, or someone like Whitman, doesn't have that issue because he very much embraces the idea of equality. That no matter what you look like and who you are and where you came from, you're human, and we are all equal. We are truly equal, and that God or Christ or the Spirit is within you, and that it's important to engage with all these other people who are like you.
And Bartleby is refusing to be a cog in the machine.
That's right.
Part of the,
That's right. He's,
part of
he
the
is.
system. He's getting off the
Yes.
trajectory.
Yeah, he does. I mean,
And
that's-
this is the fundamental assertion of freedom.
Right.
So I think it also raises the question of what's wrong with the ideal of autonomy, right? Because a fundamental problem with the ideal of autonomy is its emptiness.
Yeah.
So the individual struggles to become autonomous, self-made,
Yeah. Right.
self-made
Right,
man,
right.
and so forth. But what's the content of autonomy? Because suppose you struggle, you receive all of this, and then the content of your autonomy lies in your tasks, what you do in the world, and your connections. Outside of that, autonomy has no content. It's purely negative. And so it's like a pathology
Yeah.
in which you struggle to be completely free, and your freedom in the end is completely empty.
Right. Which is why I see Whitman is so important as a counterpoint or antidote to that notion of autonomy. Is that he genuinely sees all other humans as truly equal, and at least as a poetically embraces this a small community of equal individuals.
But implicit in that remark that I made a moment ago is this idea that the ideal of autonomy, designed and radicalized in its way, is self-destructive. destructive.
Yes, that's right, that's
And not
right.
only does it have no content, but it leads nowhere. It leads the individual into a moral wilderness.
Right, and which is why Whitman stands apart from that. That's exactly, yeah. And so that Bartleby,
And Bartleby
exemplifies-
stands against that,
Yes.
resists that.
Yes, he resists that, but in ways that are, his methodology for resisting it is not.
Has no future.
It's not the right method. Yeah, has no future.
Uh,
Yeah, that's exactly right.
But then he might say, Bartleby might say, it's better to have no future than to have a wrong future. or a
Yes,
bad future.
yes, that's exactly what he would say. That's what he virtually says that, yes. Yes. It's very good.
I think it's very interesting because it's really a discussion of the fundamental myths of the culture
Yeah,
and trying to tear it out what their assumptions are,
yeah,
and their content.
yeah. And I mean, you make me think of the most Northerners were farmers. And, you know, farming,
Well, the world which the Americans built of family farming in the first half of the 19th century, in some way was protected against that pathology
yes,
because it was a world characterized not just by partnership between the government, local government and national government, and the farmer, create the whole basis of agricultural insurance, of antidotes to the combination of climate and economic volatility to stabilize family agriculture, but cooperative competition among the family farmers.
yes, yes.
So in order to achieve economies of scale, they had, for example, to work on one another's lands.
Right, that's right,
They weren't just independent proprietors.
right.
So in that world, in that particular sector of the economy, there was a direct experience of the combination of competition and cooperation.
And collaboration,
And
yeah,
local,
Yes.
local initiative and partnership with the government,
yes,
which took them out of themselves and created a common world,
right,
which to some extent was protected
right,
against what we're discussing as pathology.
yes.
But in the absence of that, it doesn't lead anywhere.
Well, so I'm also thinking of Lincoln, who, I mean, he was, in the one sense, representative. He was born on a farm. He hated farm work. He hated farm work. He wanted to be a reader and an intellectual. His father beat him because he was reading when he should be hoeing.
And I think that this problem is not just a moral or a spiritual problem, it's also an economic
Yes,
problem.
yes.
Because this relates to the discussion that we began to have the other day about economies of scale
Right,
in industry and in services. That why did this 19th century ideal of petty commodity production, of petty entrepreneurship fail? It failed because from the middle of the 19th century on, and accelerated by the Civil War, its defenders weren't able to show how it could accommodate to the relentless imperative of economies of scale.
yes.
You could not have a modern, dynamic economy of just petty artisans. The petty artisans would have to have some way to combine
Yes.
and aggregate resources at scale. And when they and their leaders were able to show how they would do that, then the bankers and the corporations appear at the corner and say, we'll do it through money, through big business.
Right, but that banker and the bankers and the corporations, that really doesn't become prominent until
Until
after.
later, much later.
Yeah.
Yes, but it was already anticipated, right? So
Yeah.
because they were the ones who forced the aggregation of resources at scale.
Yeah.
On the basis of the plutocracy, on the basis of big business, on the basis of the corporation, on the basis of the banks that had been prohibited from operating in more than one state of the union.
Right. And each state had their own currency,
Yeah.
which was insane.
So I think this is we already intimated this at the very beginning of the course, but I think this is an alternative reading of the central narrative of American history. Because for the progressives now, the whole of American history is like a trial run leading up to the civil rights legislation of the mid-20th century. And the problem is dealing with the unfinished legacy of the Civil War and the abolition of African slavery. And that's only part of the problem, because the other, even much more immediate and general part of the problem is this early American ideal
Which is,
of freedom,
right, and
in which the economic manifestation of it is
yes.
petty commodity production, the
Yes.
petty entrepreneur. And the moral manifestation of it is this Emersonian ideal
Yes.
of the self-made individual, the little Napoleon who crowns himself and so
Right,
forth.
yeah. So there's a pretty dramatic divide between the economic, on the one hand, and economic and, on the one hand, and, your first, and political, I guess.
Yeah.
The divided tension,
Yeah.
tension between political and economic.
Well, there's a whole set of theological beliefs and institutions. I mean, what were the institutions of the early republic? They were this proto-democratic liberalism of the Madisonian Constitution, and then there was the classical legal theory of contracted property.
Right.
So this universe of this, which is supposed to be perpetual,
Yeah.
of small-scale freedom, which would be the background. And then there was the theology of 19th century Protestantism,
Right.
which anomalously in the history of religion, was a kind of privatization of religion. But the characteristic of religion is, one of its universal attributes is it refuses to be cabined in any department of experience. And
Refuses to be what?
cabined,
Right, right.
confined
Right.
in some department of existence. It demands to infuse every part of existence.
Right, which
And
is.
in a
right.
sense, 18th and 19th century Protestantism, the Protestantism of Schleiermacher, of Arnott, of Madison,
Right.
was an exception to this in the history of religion.
That's true, that's
Because there
true.
was a privatization of religion,
Yes, and the United
which is
States.
completely exceptional in the history of religion.
Yeah, it creates more different, religions than.
And was not characteristic of early Protestantism,
That's right, that's
of the
right.
Protestantism of Luther and Calvin.
That's right.
And also not characteristic of 20th century Protestantism, of the Protestantism of Karl Marx,
Right.
was an exception. But that exception, as it were, gave the tone, or set the note in American history.
That's right, that's exactly.
So you could say a combination of theological and institutional characteristics
Yes.
created this world. And that world was unable to reform itself in order to preserve itself. That is, the world of petty commodity production, of the petty bourgeoisie, would have had to reinvent itself, finding a solution to the problem of aggregation of
Yes,
resources at
yes.
scale.
Yeah, I mean, what, in a sense, a $64,000 question in terms of the North would be, had the Civil War not occurred, had Southerners not seceded, had they not bombed Fort Sumner, had they not started a war, how
The
long?
world of the petty economy would still have gone under because it went under throughout the West. It just it would have been less rapid, less radical or something.
But even after the war, though, there were still artisanal occupations in the north, particularly further out in the west.
Yeah.
So
In the other countries of late English settlement, like Australia,
yes,
New
yes,
Zealand,
yes,
South Africa with the Boers, Canada,
yes,
the resistance to that transformation continued much longer.
that's right.
Huh?
And it did.
And there was an attempt, and there was more of an attempt than there was in the United States
Yes, yes,
to save it in some way,
yeah.
like the social credit movement in Canada, for example. But in the United States, the banker took control early on.
After the war. Although there's still examples of the artisanal, there's still examples of artisanship, especially in the Midwestern states today.
Now it's being, a new basis for it
Yes,
may be created in the knowledge economy.
Yes.
We have this
yes,
insular and exclusive knowledge economy for the few, not a knowledge economy for the many. But in that world, there are many opportunities being created to reinvent that 19th century ideal. There has to be a social basis for it. It has to have representation in politics. So it's not as if the opportunity is lost forever.
right,
The opportunity keeps being recreated in a new form.
that's right, but the new forms are smaller than they have been
Compared to the past.
compared to the past, yes.
So, but I think it's, in a way, it's heartening because history gives us many chances, provided that we combine imagination with courage. Without that, there's no chance.
And the prophets that we've discussed today, they had immense amount of imagination,
Yes.
hence their status. Any other thoughts or questions? We're almost out of time. Should we let them go early?
Good choice. I'm disappointed that my argument created no response.
Ready to respond. Do you disagree or you agree?
I want to hear what you have to say again. Yeah.
I like that notion of imagination and courage.
Pardon me, but
I said I like that notion of imagination and courage, but I actually am wondering more about anger and fear, which feel like two sides of the same coins, or opposite sides of the same coins. I'm curious, and I've been thinking about this for a long time. How much of do you think the American psyche, especially at this time, comes from a sense of maybe self-pity from past experiences? Like, how much of the excuse of action or behavior do you think people have rationalized because of the imprints of the difficulties they've faced or historically have faced or people before them have faced, right? And the founding of the modern colonial country is out of an escape from like, whatever circumstances, religious circumstances, dire need. And I think there's an imprint on the psyche, at least today, that has to do with that I think justifies for some people or excuses for some people different violences. So in the antebellum period, for example, I mean, how much do you think is like the people who were sort of white working class trying to justify, slavery by their own material circumstances and lack thereof? Like how much of that imprint do you think carries in the formation of the early democracy?
Yeah, those are great questions. So and your terms of anger and fear are immensely resonant. I mean, in the 19th century, one of the ways to characterize, one of the many ways to distinguish the slave states and the free states is that a fundamental aspect of the slave states are anger and fear. It's rampant, and in fact, every free stater who went into the South, it was the first thing they noticed. It was ubiquitous. Whereas in the North, there was this sense of hope and opportunity and pride that just was bankrupt. It did not exist in the South.
And intimately associated with free labor.
Yes, yes.
Free labor was the essential
Yes.
condition.
Yes.
And then the question became, what makes free labor free? If wage labor is as Lincoln believed, a continuation of serfdom under another form, how can free labor remain free? That is the unanswered question.
But Lincoln celebrated free labor.
Yes, free labor, exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
Exactly. But the argument for free labor had as one of its consequences the idea that wage labor is not truly free labor.
Correct, but the number of wage laborers
It's tiny in the North,
yes, and it expands, but
then it became the majority later on.
yeah, and it actually, yes, it becomes the majority, and even during the war itself, it was, that free labor ideal was destroyed by the war. To a large
That
extent.
was the immediate reason, but since it was also destroyed in all the Western countries that had not had a civil war,
Yes.
we can see that the causation is not primarily the Civil War.
That's right.
The Civil War was simply the accelerator.
Yes, that's right. The Civil War was the accelerator, with some few small exceptions. Yeah, that's right. That's it. And it was, I mean, your point about anger and fear today is the United States today, that it's a nation. I mean, that's one of the ways to, in my view, to characterize the nation is through anger and fear today. It's ubiquitous. It's ubiquitous because for all kinds of reasons which we'll get into. But it is truly ubiquitous, which then creates opportunities for wealth. To exploit anger and fear can make you wealthy.
And powerful.
And powerful, which is immensely dangerous. Any last bits of wisdom that you want to share?
The lady who wrote that letter to Whitman, did she work on anything else? Like, was she a writer?
Yes, she was a writer. She was a what's her name?
Susan.
Pardon? Susan Garnett Smith. So she was an aspiring writer. So she had published a few pieces in her local newspaper, but she wasn't known outside of her town. But she was an aspiring writer, hence her love of women. Yeah, it's a great question. And she acknowledged. I mean, she was one of the working women of the world. But she was an aspiring artist writer. Yeah. And recognized Whitman's brilliance as a poet, and truly wanted to commune with him and meet him. Which is, I mean, there's a long tradition of that. You're inspired by someone else, and say, "Oh, I wanna be this. I wanna do that," because of the inspiration that is obtained from seeing what others have been able to do. I mean, that's part of the beauty of, in a sense, of democratic society. Forever.
The best way to achieve greatness is to imitate greatness.
Yes.
That's why for centuries people read Plutarch's Lives.
That's right. Imitation is will lead to originality.
We're out of time.
Yeah. We'll see you next. And for undergrads, the paper is due on the 30th, right?
I'm so unaware. You're like, yeah, we'll come